Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Texas. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We are interested in knowing to which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The frontier town of Coyote Springs no longer appears on modern maps of Texas. Located approximately 30 miles southwest of Fort Worth, what remains of it lies buried beneath private ranch land and the unforgiving passage of time. Yet, in 1883, this small settlement represented everything the American frontier stood for: opportunity, lawlessness, and secrets carried to the grave. In the spring of 1883, 5 men disappeared from Coyote Springs within the span of 2 months. All were visitors to the town, cattle drivers, prospectors, and drifters passing through on their way to somewhere else. None of them ever reached their intended destinations. The subsequent investigation uncovered a conspiracy so methodical, so calculated in its execution, that it remained virtually undetected until a land surveyor stumbled upon human remains in 1962, nearly 80 years after the disappearances. What follows is the account of what became known in certain law enforcement circles as the Coyote Springs vanishings, a case that challenges our understanding of frontier justice and the lengths to which people will go to secure their futures in an unforgiving land. The town of Coyote Springs emerged from the Texas plains in 1876, following the establishment of the Fort Worth-Yuma stagecoach route. Initially little more than a watering stop, it grew modestly as cattle drives began to pass nearby. By 1883, approximately 200 souls called Coyote Springs home. The town boasted a general store, blacksmith, 2 churches, a small hotel, and 3 saloons. Of these establishments, the Silver Spur Saloon stood apart, not for its grandeur, which it lacked, but for the peculiar reputation of its female employees. The Silver Spur was owned by Jedediah Blackwood, a former Confederate soldier who'd settled in Texas after the war. County records indicate Blackwood arrived in the area in 1874, purchasing the land where the Silver Spur would eventually stand, for a surprisingly small sum from a widow eager to return east. Blackwood was known to be taciturn and private, running his establishment with rigid discipline. According to town records, Blackwood employed 4 women as hostesses at the Silver Spur: Elizabeth Warren, Mary Callahan, Josephine Miller, and Rebecca Thornton. These women, collectively known as Blackwood's Girls, were unusual for the frontier in that they were educated, well-spoken, and by all accounts conducted themselves with a reserve uncommon in frontier saloon employees. Elizabeth Warren, approximately 32 years old in 1883, was described in contemporaneous accounts as tall, slender, with auburn hair, and a measured way of speaking that suggested Eastern education. Local gossip held that she had been a teacher in Pennsylvania before some unspecified scandal forced her westward. No documentation confirming this background has ever been located. Mary Callahan, the youngest at perhaps 26, was noted for her striking blonde hair and quiet demeanor. She rarely engaged in extended conversation with patrons, but maintained a watchful presence from behind the bar. Unlike the others, Callahan was occasionally seen attending services at the local Methodist church, though she never participated in community functions. Josephine Miller, estimated to be in her mid-30s, possessed dark hair and what one witness later described as eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of every man who entered. Miller handled most of the Silver Spur's business dealings when Blackwood was absent, suggesting a position of particular trust. Several accounts mention her, facility with numbers and record-keeping. Rebecca Thornton, the oldest at approximately 40, was described as matronly in appearance, but sharp-witted in conversation. Gray streaked her dark hair, and she walked with a slight limp attributed to a childhood injury. Of the 4 women, Thornton was most frequently mentioned in Sheriff Callahan's reports as the one who engaged newcomers in conversation, extracting details about their travels and plans. What distinguished the Silver Spur further was its clientele. While local patrons occasionally frequented the establishment, Blackwood seemed to prefer catering to travelers, men passing through, unknown to the local population. According to accounts from the period, Blackwood's girls were particularly attentive to men traveling alone, those carrying substantial funds, or individuals unlikely to be missed should they disappear. It was a preference that would later prove significant. The winter of 1882-83 was particularly harsh in north-central Texas. Cattle drives had been delayed by late storms, and by spring, a backlog of livestock needed moving northward. This meant an influx of drovers and ranch hands through towns like Coyote Springs, men with money in their pockets and a thirst for company after long isolating weeks on the trail. The first man to disappear was Thomas Galloway, a 42-year-old cattle driver from San Antonio. According to the Coyote Springs Gazette, dated April 3, 1883, Galloway arrived in town on March 28th with a small herd bound for Kansas. After selling his cattle, he was seen entering the Silver Spur on the evening of March 30th. He never rejoined his companions for the return journey south. A notice in the Gazette described Galloway as a man of medium height and build, with a graying beard and a noticeable scar across his left cheek, acquired during the war between the states. His companions reported that Galloway had been carrying approximately $300 from the cattle sale, a substantial sum for the time. When questioned, they indicated that Galloway had mentioned possibly heading to California rather than returning to Texas, though he had made no definite statements to this effect. Sheriff Emmett Callahan noted in his official log that he questioned Blackwood and his employees about Galloway's whereabouts. According to this record, Elizabeth Warren stated that she had indeed spoken with Galloway, who had expressed interest in prospecting opportunities in California. She claimed he had departed on the westbound stage the following morning. The stage driver, when interviewed, had no recollection of such a passenger, but acknowledged that he rarely paid attention to who boarded at various stops. Within 3 weeks, 4 more men had similarly vanished. William Hargrove, a 36-year-old prospector, James McCluskey, 29, a surveyor for the railroad, Frederick Walsh, 44, a businessman from St. Louis, and Daniel Cooper, 33, a horse trader. All were last seen at the Silver Spur. All had been observed in conversation with one or more of Blackwood's girls. William Hargrove had arrived in Coyote Springs on April 7th, staying at the town's small hotel while supposedly awaiting the arrival of partners for a prospecting venture. Hotel records show he paid for 3 nights in advance. On the evening of April 9th, he was seen drinking at the Silver Spur, engaged in conversation with Mary Callahan. When he failed to return to his room, the hotel owner, Jacob Finch, assumed Hargrove had simply moved on, as was common with transient guests. Hargrove's room contained few personal effects, a change of clothing, a small leather-bound journal containing mostly financial notations, and a worn daguerreotype of a woman presumed to be his wife or mother. These items were eventually sold to cover the cost of the room. James McCluskey's disappearance on April 15th generated slightly more concern, as he was in Coyote Springs on official business for the Texas and Pacific Railroad. McCluskey had been surveying potential rail routes and was expected to report to company officials in Fort Worth on April 20th. When he failed to appear, a company representative traveled to Coyote Springs on April 25th to inquire about his whereabouts. According to Sheriff Callahan's notes, Blackwood claimed that McCluskey had mentioned heading north to investigate an alternative route. The railroad eventually hired a replacement surveyor, and the matter was not pursued further. Frederick Walsh, a businessman from St. Louis, had traveled to Texas to assess investment opportunities in cattle operations. Staying at the hotel under the name F.W. Walsh, he was described by the hotel owner as well-dressed and well-spoken, carrying a considerable sum in bank drafts. Walsh spent several evenings at the Silver Spur between April 18th and 21st, reportedly in conversation with both Elizabeth Warren and Rebecca Thornton. On the morning of April 22nd, Walsh's room was found empty, with his luggage still present, but papers missing from his briefcase. Sheriff Callahan's inquiry at the Silver Spur yielded a statement from Rebecca Thornton that Walsh had mentioned receiving an urgent communication requiring his immediate return to St. Louis. No such communication was ever traced through the local telegraph office. The final disappearance of this initial series involved Daniel Cooper, a horse trader known to make regular circuits through North Texas settlements. Cooper had arrived on April 25th with 6 horses he intended to sell or trade. By April 27th, he had successfully sold all his stock and was seen celebrating at the Silver Spur. According to witnesses, Cooper spent much of the evening in conversation with Josephine Miller, showing her what appeared to be a considerable roll of banknotes. Cooper's empty wagon was discovered the following day at the town livery, with no sign of Cooper himself. When questioned, Josephine Miller stated that Cooper had mentioned plans to purchase additional horses in Dallas and would return within the month. He never did. At the time, these disappearances generated little official concern. Men frequently abandoned obligations, changed plans, or simply moved on without notice in frontier territories. Sheriff Emmett Callahan of Coyote Springs noted the incidents in his logs, but conducted only cursory inquiries. According to his notes, preserved in the Texas State Archives, Blackwood and his employees claimed each man had mentioned plans to continue traveling, some to California, others to Oklahoma Territory, without evidence of foul play, and with no bodies discovered, the matter was considered closed. The town continued as before. The Silver Spur operated normally, though observant residents noted that Blackwood seemed to acquire new furnishings for his establishment with surprising frequency. His girls began to dress in finer clothing. Blackwood himself purchased additional property on the outskirts of town, a remote cabin and surrounding acreage approximately 5 miles from Coyote Springs proper. During this period, a curious pattern emerged in the Silver Spur's operations. According to municipal tax records, the establishment's reported revenue remained consistently modest, suggesting a business that was stable but not particularly profitable. Yet Blackwood and his employees displayed signs of increasing prosperity. Elizabeth Warren was observed wearing a gold necklace similar to one that Thomas Galloway had reportedly purchased in San Antonio before his journey. Mary Callahan acquired a fine saddle horse, which she stabled at the town livery. Josephine Miller opened an account at the Fort Worth Bank, making regular deposits transported by the weekly stage. Rebecca Thornton commissioned a local carpenter to build custom furnishings for her rooms above the saloon. These inconsistencies apparently raised few concerns among the townspeople. As one resident later told investigators, folks minded their own business in those days. If Blackwood and his girls were doing well, most figured they'd earned it somehow, and it wasn't for others to question. What happened in Coyote Springs might have remained buried forever if not for an unseasonable flood in the spring of 1886. Heavy rains swelled Coyote Creek, washing away portions of the bank behind Blackwood's remote property. A local rancher, Silas Montgomery, seeking stray cattle, discovered what appeared to be human remains protruding from the eroded soil. Sheriff Callahan was summoned, and an initial excavation revealed the partial remains of at least 3 individuals. Montgomery's statement, recorded in Sheriff Callahan's log, described the discovery in stark terms. "I was tracking a heifer that had strayed from the herd when I noticed something white in the freshly washed bank of the creek. At first, I thought it might be an animal bone, but as I got closer, I could see it was a human arm bone with some tatters of cloth still clinging to it. Further along the bank, maybe 10 feet away, I spotted what looked like the top of a skull. That's when I rode straight for town to fetch the sheriff." Confronted with evidence of multiple deaths, Callahan rode to the Silver Spur to question Blackwood, only to find the saloon abandoned. Blackwood and his 4 female employees had departed. during the night, leaving behind most of their possessions. A search of the premises uncovered a hidden cellar beneath the saloon containing personal effects, watches, wallets, clothing items, belonging to at least a dozen different men, including the 5 known to have disappeared in 1883. The cellar, accessed through a trapdoor concealed beneath a heavy cabinet in Blackwood's private office, contained a troubling array of items. Sheriff Callahan's inventory, still preserved in county records, listed 8 pocket watches of varying quality, 3 of gold and 5 of silver, 11 wallets or billfolds, most empty of cash but containing personal papers, 14 items of male jewelry, including rings, cufflinks, and tie pins, a collection of male clothing neatly folded, and a wooden chest containing papers belonging to at least 15 different individuals. Among these papers were letters, identification documents, and personal diaries, suggesting that the Silver Spur's victims extended well beyond the 5 men who had disappeared in the spring of 1883. One diary, belonging to a Henry Williamson, who had never been reported missing in Coyote Springs, contained entries up to October 1881, with a final notation indicating the writer's intention to spend the evening at a saloon recommended by the hotel proprietor. Further excavation at the creek bank revealed 6 distinct burial sites, though only partial remains were recovered due to water damage. Forensic techniques being primitive, authorities could not positively identify the victims, though personal effects found with some remains matched descriptions of the missing men's possessions. Most disturbing was the condition of the remains. Several skulls exhibited fracture patterns consistent with blunt force trauma, while 2 sets of remains showed evidence of arsenic poisoning, as determined by rudimentary chemical tests conducted by the Fort Worth coroner. Dr. Walter Simmons, the county coroner who examined the remains, noted in his report that the arsenic levels detected were significantly higher than would occur naturally, suggesting deliberate poisoning. His examination of the fractured skulls indicated that the blows had been delivered from behind, with considerable force, using a cylindrical object approximately 1 inch in diameter. Among the items recovered from the Silver Spur was an iron rod matching this description, normally used for adjusting the stove damper, but with suspicious stains along its length. A search of county records revealed that Blackwood had sold his properties just days before the discoveries, with paperwork indicating he'd relocated to New Mexico Territory. Authorities there were notified, but no trace of Blackwood or his female employees was ever found. The legal representative who had handled the property transactions, a Fort Worth attorney named Gerald Wingate, claimed to have conducted the entire affair by mail, never meeting Blackwood in person. The funds from the sale had been directed to a bank in El Paso, where they were withdrawn by a woman matching Rebecca Thornton's description 2 days after deposit. The case might have ended there, an unsolved frontier murder, if not for the chance discovery made by land surveyor Robert Mackenzie in September 1962. While assessing property lines for a ranch sale near the former site of Coyote Springs, Mackenzie discovered a metal box buried beneath a lightning-struck oak tree. The box contained a leather-bound journal belonging to Elizabeth Warren, one of Blackwood's girls. Mackenzie's account of the discovery, recorded in a sworn statement to Texas Rangers Captain James Farrell, described how the box came to light. "I was taking sightings near the old oak when my assistant noticed something metallic gleaming at the base of the tree. Recent rains had washed away some soil, and the box was partially exposed. It was made of tin, about the size of a cigar box, with a simple clasp closure. Inside was a leather-bound book wrapped in oilcloth, remarkably well preserved considering how long it must have been buried. The journal, now housed in the Texas Historical Society archives, provides a chilling account of the systematic murder of at least 17 men between 1879 and 1886. Warren's writings detail a calculated operation in which she and the other women would identify suitable victims, men carrying substantial funds, traveling alone, and unlikely to be immediately missed. They would engage these men in conversation, determining their background, destination, and whether anyone expected them elsewhere. May 14, 1882, Warren wrote, Mr. Blackwood has approved the cattle driver from Laredo. Mary will attend to him this evening. His companions believe he intends to break from their party and head to California. We have arranged for him to receive a letter appearing to confirm these plans. The usual method should suffice. The usual method, as described in later entries, involved one of two approaches. For victims selected by Warren or Josephine Miller, a lethal dose of arsenic would be administered in whiskey or food, causing death that resembled severe illness. For those targeted by Mary Callahan or Rebecca Thornton, the men would be led to believe they had been invited to private quarters, only to be struck from behind with an iron rod kept behind the bar for this purpose. An entry dated August 3rd, 1880, provides disturbing insight into the mechanics of their operation. R.T., presumably Rebecca Thornton, has perfected her technique with the rod. The man expires almost instantly with minimal blood. J.M., likely Josephine Miller, then searches the body while Mr. B., Blackwood, prepares the wagon. We have the body removed from the premises within 30 minutes and all evidence eliminated. Before dawn, the grave is prepared in advance at the creek property, away from the regular burial sites. The bodies were transported by wagon to Blackwood's remote property and buried along the creek bank. Personal items of value were retained, while documentation, letters, identification papers, was destroyed. Money and valuables were divided among the 5 conspirators, with Blackwood receiving the largest share. Warren's journal reveals a disturbing lack of remorse. She writes clinically about their victims, referring to them as opportunities rather than people. In one entry dated November 1883, she notes, "It becomes easier with each opportunity. The men blend together now, their faces, their stories. They are merely means to our advancement." Mr. Blackwood says 3 more should provide sufficient funds for our relocation. A particularly chilling passage describes the group's method for selecting victims. "We have refined our criteria for selection. The ideal candidate travels alone or can be easily separated from companions. He carries cash rather than bank drafts. He has mentioned to others some intent to change his plans or travel to distant locations. He has few or no family connections seeking his whereabouts. When such a man enters our establishment, R.T. engages him in preliminary conversation to assess suitability. If she approves, she signals to the rest of us with a particular phrase, 'This gentleman might enjoy our special reserve whiskey.' This is our indication to proceed." What motivated this murderous enterprise? Warren's journal suggests a complex mixture of greed and what she perceived as justice. Multiple entries reference the limited options available to women in the frontier territories, particularly those without family connections or financial resources. "We have taken control of our fates," she wrote in February 1884. "Men have always profited from our existence. Now we profit from theirs." Another entry provides glimpses into the backgrounds of Blackwood's girls, though details remain sparse. M.C. Mary Callahan spoke of her former life today, something she rarely does. The man who claimed to be her husband, who sold her services to his friends until she fled westward. J.M., Josephine Miller, nodded in recognition, her experience with the mine owner in Colorado bearing similar marks. R.T., Rebecca Thornton, said nothing, but the scar at her throat spoke volumes. "We have all suffered at men's hands. Now the ledger balances." Blackwood himself emerges from Warren's writings as a calculating opportunist rather than a driven killer. Mr. B does not participate directly, Warren noted in July 1881. He provides the location, the planning, the disposal. The selection and execution he leaves to us. claiming our intuition for suitable targets exceeds his own. I suspect he simply prefers to keep blood off his hands while taking the lion's share of the proceeds. The journal indicates that the operation became increasingly sophisticated over time. By 1882, the group had established connections with a document forger in Fort Worth who provided convincing letters or telegrams that could be used to explain a victim's sudden departure. They developed a system of signals to communicate across the saloon floor without speaking. They rotated burial sites to avoid detection and used quicklime to accelerate decomposition. Warren's writings also reveal tension within the group as their activities continued. R.T. and J.M. argued again today regarding selection criteria, she wrote in December 1883. R.T. advocates for increasing our frequency, targeting even modest opportunities. J.M. insists we maintain discipline and select only the most profitable candidates. Mr. B sides with J.M., as always. The waiting tries R.T.'s patience, but it has kept us undetected for years. By early 1886, Warren's entries suggest the group was planning a final series of operations before disbanding. Our arrangements are nearly complete, she wrote in March. 1886, Mr. B has secured properties in California under our new names. J.M. has established bank accounts in Denver and San Francisco. After the spring cattle drives, we will conduct our final business in Coyote Springs, liquidate our holdings, and disperse as planned. 5 years of careful work culminates in our freedom from this place and these identities. The discovery of Warren's journal prompted a reinvestigation of the Coyote Springs case in 1962, but by then, all principals were presumed deceased. Texas Rangers conducted a thorough search of the former Blackwood property, eventually uncovering the remains of 11 additional victims in various locations around the abandoned homestead. Forensic analysis confirmed that most had died from blunt force trauma or poisoning. Captain James Farrell of the Texas Rangers led the 1962 investigation, employing forensic techniques unavailable to authorities in the 1880s. His detailed report noted that the victims included men of varying ages and backgrounds, but all appeared to be travelers rather than local residents. Carbon dating of the remains confirmed that the killings had occurred between approximately 1879 and 1886, aligning with the timeline established in Warren's journal. Most poignant among the discoveries was a grave containing the remains of a man later identified as Michael Donovan, a 27-year-old Irish immigrant who had written regularly to his mother in Boston. His last letter, dated September 17, 1882, mentioned plans to spend the winter working at a ranch near Fort Worth before continuing to California in the spring. Among his effects, preserved in the grave, was a small leather pouch containing a lock of red hair and a handwritten note, "For luck on your journey, return when you're settled. With love, Kathleen." Donovan's name had never appeared on any missing persons report. The most intriguing question, what became of Blackwood and his accomplices, remains unanswered. Warren's final journal entry, dated June 3, 1886, states only, "The plan proceeds. By week's end we will be established in our new identities. Mr. Blackwood has arranged everything. This will be my final entry as Elizabeth Warren. Historical records offer tantalizing hints. A woman matching Josephine Miller's description appears in Sacramento, California, records in 1887 as the wife of a prominent banker. A Mary Callahan is listed as co-owner of a hotel in Denver, Colorado in 1890. A Jedediah Blackwood is recorded as having died in a home fire in Santa Fe in 1891, though the body was reportedly too badly burned for positive identification. Rebecca's Thornton and Elizabeth Warren vanished completely from historical record. Some researchers speculate they may have left the country entirely, perhaps relocating to Mexico or Canada with their share of the ill-gotten gains. Others suggest they may have adopted entirely new identities, blending seamlessly into respectable society. During the 1962 reinvestigation, Ranger Captain Farrell attempted to trace the subsequent movements of the 5 conspirators, with limited success. The woman in Sacramento, believed to be Josephine Miller, lived as Victoria Chambers, wife of bank president Howard Chambers, until her death in 1912. Photographs from Sacramento society events show a woman bearing a striking resemblance to descriptions of Miller, though no definitive identification was ever made. The Chambers family, when contacted by investigators, denied any connection to the Coyote Springs case and refused to permit exhumation of Victoria's remains for verification. The Mary Callahan, who co-owned the Denver Hotel, operating under the name Western Star Lodge, sold her interest in the business in 1905 and reportedly relocated to San Francisco. City records indicate she died in the 1906 earthquake and fire, though no body was ever recovered. Investigators noted that this convenient death might have been yet another disappearing act in a lifetime of deceptions. The Jedediah Blackwood, who died in Santa Fe, had established himself as a respectable businessman, operating a general store and serving on the local Chamber of Commerce. Fire investigators at the time noted certain irregularities in the blaze that claimed his life, including multiple points of origin and the curious fact that most of Blackwood's financial documents and personal papers had been removed from the premises shortly before the fire. The timing, just days after Texas authorities had circulated wanted notices with Blackwood's description to neighboring territories, struck later investigators as suspicious. The Silver Spur murders represent a striking inversion of typical frontier violence. In an era when women were frequently victims, Blackwood's girls transformed themselves into predators, using societal expectations of female subservience as a weapon. Men who might have been wary of male strangers thought nothing of accepting a drink from a seemingly deferential saloon girl. The story of the Silver Spur remained largely unknown outside of specialized historical circles until 1968, when University of Texas historian Dr. Margaret Holloway published Deadly Hospitality, Gender and Murder on the American Frontier. Holloway's research included interviews with elderly residents of nearby communities who remembered stories of the abandoned town and its mysterious saloon owner. One interviewee, Clara Jenkins, then 96 years old, recalled her father warning her about Blackwood's women when she was a child. "Pa would say, 'Those women smile while they kill you,'" Jenkins told Holloway. Folks knew something wasn't right about that place, but no one wanted to look too closely. Men kept disappearing, but in those days, people disappeared all the time. Life was cheap on the frontier. Holloway's research also uncovered correspondence between Sheriff Emmett Callahan and authorities in neighboring counties that suggested a growing suspicion about the Silver Spur in the months before the discovery of remains in 1886. A letter from Callahan to Parker County Sheriff William Denton, dated January 1886, makes oblique reference to unusual patterns regarding travelers passing through Coyote Springs, particularly those frequenting a certain establishment. Denton's reply indicates he had noticed similar patterns, but lacked evidence to proceed with any investigation. What makes the Coyote Springs case particularly noteworthy is the level of calculation involved. Unlike impulsive crimes of passion or opportunity, the Silver Spur murders represented a sustained criminal enterprise operating successfully for years in a small community. The conspirators created a system for selecting victims, disposing of bodies, and maintaining a facade of normalcy that prevented serious investigation. Warren's journal revealed that the group maintained detailed records of their victims, including physical descriptions, possessions, stated destinations, and any companions who might inquire about them. "Record-keeping is essential," she wrote in September 1880. "We must know who might come looking, what stories we have told, what possessions might be recognized." J.M. maintains the ledger in code, with entries appearing to relate to liquor inventory and saloon accounts. This methodical approach extended to their public personas. Warren described how each woman cultivated a specific character designed to disarm potential victims. MC presents as naive and somewhat simple, encouraging men to underestimate her intelligence. RT adopts a maternal manner, offering comfort and counsel to weary travelers. JM appears businesslike and reserved, appealing to more sophisticated targets. I maintain the role of the educated Eastern lady fallen on hard times, a persona that invites confidence and trust, particularly from men of similar background. The town of Coyote Springs itself faded away in the 1890s as the railroad bypassed it in favor of larger settlements. By 1900, it was effectively abandoned, its buildings gradually reclaimed by the Texas landscape. Today, nothing remains of the town except scattered foundation stones and the occasional rusted artifact turned up by ranchers plowing fields. The site of the Silver Spur Saloon was excavated by archaeological students from Texas Tech University in 1972. Their findings included bottle fragments, poker chips, and a single pearl earring buried beneath what had been the saloon floor. Whether this belonged to one of Blackwood's girls or perhaps to an unknown victim remains undetermined. Dr. Raymond Townsend, who led the archaeological expedition, noted in his report that the physical layout of the Silver Spur aligned precisely with descriptions in Warren's journal. The foundation reveals a structure approximately 40 feet by 60 feet, with the bar area positioned to allow clear sight lines to all entrances. The private rooms mentioned in Warren's writings were located at the rear of the building, with narrow corridors facilitating quick access to the storage area where bodies were temporarily held. Even in ruins, the building's design suggests a space optimized for surveillance and concealment, architecture serving criminal purpose. Elizabeth Warren's journal was temporarily displayed at the Texas State History Museum in Austin in 1985 as part of an exhibition on frontier justice, before being removed due to public complaints about its disturbing content. It remains accessible only to researchers with special permission from the Texas Historical Society. Curator Dr. Eleanor Sanchez, who organized the exhibition, later commented on the public response. Visitors were profoundly disturbed not by the fact of frontier murder, which is well documented and almost romanticized in our cultural narrative, but by the gender of the perpetrators. A display about male outlaws killing for profit generated no controversy, but the story of women committing calculated murder for financial gain seemed to violate deeply held assumptions about feminine nature. This discomfort reveals more about our gendered expectations than about the historical reality of the frontier. The case files related to the 1886 and 1962 investigations are housed in the Texas Rangers Historical Archives in Austin. They include Sheriff Callahan's original notes, photographs of items recovered from victims, and transcripts of interviews conducted during the 1962 reinvestigation. The files were classified until 1990, when they were released under the Texas Historical Documents Access Act. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Coyote Springs case is how effectively the perpetrators exploited social conventions of their time. In a frontier society where women were generally viewed as non-threatening, Blackwood's girls weaponized their perceived vulnerability. The victims, many hardened by frontier life and presumably capable of defending themselves against obvious threats, never suspected danger from the women serving their drinks and engaging them in conversation. This theme recurs throughout Warren's journal. "Men reveal everything to us," she wrote in April 1882. "They speak of their money, their roots, their lack of family, all the information we require to select our targets. They see women as repositories for their confidence rather than as potential threats. This blindness is our greatest advantage. The conspiracy functioned in part because it inverted expected power dynamics." Warren noted, When a man grows suspicious of another man, he becomes guarded, prepared for a confrontation. When he grows suspicious of a woman, he assumes she fears him and seeks to reassure her, even as doubts cross their faces. Why is my drink bitter? Why does she stand behind me? They suppress these thoughts rather than appear frightened in a woman's presence. Pride becomes our weapon. Periodic rumors surface claiming that descendants of Blackwood or his female accomplices have attempted to suppress investigation into the case. In 1967, a fire at the Fort Worth County Records Office destroyed several documents related to property ownership in the Coyote Springs area. While officially ruled accidental, some researchers have questioned the timing, coming just months before. Dr. Holloway's book was published. In 1953, a woman named Sarah Mitchell died in Portland, Oregon at the age of 91. Among her possessions was a silver locket containing a faded photograph of 4 women standing before a wooden building. On the back was written, Elizabeth, Mary, Josephine, Rebecca, Silver Spur, 1883. Mitchell's connection to these women, if any, was never established, as she had no known relatives to interview after her death. The locket disappeared from the county property office before researchers could examine it. Mitchell's personal papers, reviewed by Oregon historical researcher Thomas Grant in 1965, revealed little about her background before her arrival in Portland in 1902. She had lived modestly as a seamstress and occasional piano teacher, maintaining few close relationships. Her will directed that her ashes be scattered at sea with no marker or memorial. Grant noted that Mitchell possessed several books on Texas history, including an annotated copy of Frontier Justice in the Southwest, with particular attention to chapters dealing with unsolved crimes. The last living person with direct memory of Coyote Springs, Elmer Dawson, died in 1969 at the age of 104. As a boy of 18, he had delivered mail to the settlement in its final years. In an interview conducted shortly before his death, Dawson recalled, "That place had a feeling about it like the land itself wanted to forget what happened there. After they found those bodies, nobody wanted to stay. It wasn't just fear. It was like shame, like the whole town had been complicit somehow." By 95, tumbleweeds were rolling through empty streets. Nature took it back quicker than normal. Sometimes I think that was for the best. Dawson provided one of the few physical descriptions of Blackwood himself. He was a tall man, over 6 feet, but he carried himself in a way that didn't draw attention. Dark beard, always neatly trimmed, and he dressed like a businessman rather than a saloon keeper. He had this way of watching people without seeming to watch them. Cold eyes. Never saw him laugh proper, just this tight smile that never reached his eyes. Folks respected him, but nobody much liked him. Of Blackwood's girls, Dawson remembered, they weren't like other saloon women. They dressed modest, spoke proper. The blonde one, Mary, I think, she had this innocent look about her, like a schoolgirl almost. The older one, Rebecca, she reminded me of a schoolteacher, always watching, like she was taking notes on your behavior. Elizabeth was the pretty one, carried herself like she came from money. Josephine was the one who handled the books, serious, type. Strange group for a frontier saloon, should have been a warning right there. Today, the site where Coyote Springs once stood is private property, with no marker or monument indicating its historical significance. Cattle graze over ground that once held a community, and the creek where Blackwood and his accomplices buried their victims has long since changed course due to erosion and drought. Periodic attempts to establish a historical marker have been rejected by successive property owners, many citing a desire to avoid association with the site's grim history. In 1978, a proposal to include the Coyote Springs case in a Texas Historical Commission publication on significant frontier crimes was narrowly defeated after descendants of original Coyote Springs residents lobbied against it. Their petition argued that highlighting the murders would unfairly tarnish the legacy of an entire community for the actions of 5 individuals who were not representative of the town's character or values. The story of the Silver Spur Saloon serves as a dark reminder of the lawlessness that characterized parts of the American frontier, a lawlessness that sometimes wore unexpected faces. While history often focuses on male outlaws and gunfighters of the period, the calculated murders committed by Blackwood's girls represent a different kind of frontier crime, patient, methodical, and hidden behind socially acceptable facades. In the words of Dr. Holloway, the frontier created spaces where traditional rules could be inverted or abandoned entirely. While we typically associate this lawlessness with masculine violence, the case of the Silver Spur demonstrates that predatory behavior recognized no gender boundaries. In the unforgiving Texas landscape, Blackwood and his female accomplices created their own moral universe, one in which human life was merely a commodity to be exploited. The final fate of Blackwood's girls remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of Texas criminal history. Did they, as some evidence suggests, successfully integrate into respectable society in other regions? Did they continue their criminal activities elsewhere, perhaps in modified form, or did they meet their own violent ends, perhaps at Blackwood's hands, once their usefulness ended? In 1958, a retired Texas Ranger named William Garrison claimed to have encountered an elderly woman in a San Francisco hotel who, after several drinks, began speaking about a saloon in Texas where men went in but didn't come out. When Garrison pressed for details, the woman reportedly became agitated and denied having said anything significant. Garrison attempted to locate the woman the following day, but she had checked out of the hotel, leaving no forwarding address. Garrison's report, filed with the Rangers Cold Case Division, described the woman as approximately 80 years of age, well-dressed, speaking with the refinement of education, but occasionally lapsing into frontier expressions when agitated. He noted that she wore an unusual brooch fashioned from a gold coin dated 1880, similar to items reported missing from several Silver Spur victims. When Garrison casually mentioned Coyote Springs, the woman reportedly paled and terminated the conversation immediately. In 1932, a woman named Eleanor Simmons published a memoir titled Western Passages, describing her life in various frontier settlements. Though the book focused primarily on her experiences in Colorado mining towns, one chapter contained a disturbing anecdote about a brief stay in North Texas in 1883. Simmons described encountering 4 women of unusual refinement, operating a saloon with military precision, and feeling a sense of wrongness about the establishment that prompted my immediate departure. Historians have speculated that Simmons may have briefly visited the Silver Spur, perhaps even being assessed as a potential victim before something in her manner suggested she would be missed if she disappeared. The most tantalizing clue regarding the women's fate emerged in 1967, when a history professor at UCLA received an anonymous package containing a collection of letters dated between 1888 and 1902. The letters, written by someone identifying herself only as J, described establishing a new life in California after our business in Texas concluded messily. References to the 4 winds scattering and B's unfortunate accident led some researchers to speculate that the letters might have been written by Josephine Miller, describing the group's dispersal and possibly Blackwood's death. The letters mentioned R pursuing theatrical ambitions in San Francisco and E finding a suitable position with a school in Canada, potentially referring to Rebecca Thornton and Elizabeth Warren. The authenticity of these letters has never been conclusively established, and their current whereabouts are unknown. What remains certain is that for 7 years in a small Texas frontier town, 4 women and their male accomplice committed murder repeatedly without detection or consequence. They exploited social blind spots and expectations, turning the perceived vulnerability of their gender into a deadly advantage. The creek behind Blackwood's property has long since dried up. The trees that once provided cover for clandestine burials have withered in the Texas heat. The town itself exists only in scattered records and fading memories. But the legacy of the Silver Spur murders continues to challenge our understanding of frontier history and the complex, often contradictory roles women navigated within it. For the victims, men whose names we know and others lost to history, justice never truly came. Their bones rest in unmarked graves, their stories abbreviated by poison or violence in a saloon long reduced to dust. And somewhere, perhaps, the descendants of Blackwood's girls live on, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge their connection to one of the most methodical killing operations in American frontier history. In 1962, coinciding with the reinvestigation of the case, an elderly woman in Sacramento reportedly approached the Texas Ranger's office with information about the Coyote Springs murders. Before her scheduled interview, she suffered a fatal heart attack in her hotel room. Among her possessions was a newspaper clipping about the discovery of Warren's journal, with a handwritten note in the margin, reading simply, "Some secrets should remain buried." Her identity was never conclusively established, though her personal effects included several pieces of jewelry matching descriptions of items taken from Silver Spur victims. The forensic evidence recovered from the Coyote Springs burial sites has been re-examined several times as investigative techniques advanced. In 1994, soil samples from the grave sites were analyzed using methods unavailable to earlier investigators. Traces of arsenic consistent with Warren's journal description of poisoning methods were detected, along with remnants of quicklime used to accelerate decomposition. DNA analysis of bone fragments allowed tentative identification of 3 victims. Beyond those already known, though efforts to locate descendants for confirmation proved unsuccessful in most cases. One exception involved the remains believed to belong to Frederick Walsh, the St. Louis businessman. In 2001, Walsh's great-granddaughter provided a DNA sample that confirmed the identification. In a statement released through her attorney, she expressed relief at finally knowing her ancestors' fate, noting that family lore had always included stories of a great-grandfather who went west and vanished. The family had preserved letters Walsh had sent prior to his disappearance, describing his business ventures and plans to return east by summer. His final letter mentioned meeting a most interesting group of ladies operating a surprisingly refined establishment in this rough cattle town. 3 days later, he disappeared forever. The psychological aspects of the Silver Spur case have fascinated criminologists for decades. Dr. Rachel Morgan, a forensic psychologist who studied the case extensively in the 1990s, noted unusual features that distinguished it from typical serial killing operations. What's remarkable is the group dynamic. Serial murder is typically a solitary activity, yet here we have 5 individuals working in concert, maintaining their deadly conspiracy for years, without apparent conflict or betrayal. Warren's journal suggests an almost corporate structure to their enterprise with defined roles, performance metrics, and long-term business planning. It represents an organizational approach to murder that anticipates modern criminal syndicates. Morgan further observed that Warren's writings revealed none of the sexual motivations often associated with serial killers. Their motivation appears to have been purely financial, combined with a distorted sense of retributive justice for perceived wrongs against women in general. Warren repeatedly frames their actions as balancing accounts rather than expressing any pleasure in the killing itself. This instrumental approach to murder, viewing it as simply a means to financial security, represents a cold rationality. That's particularly disturbing. The role of Jedediah Blackwood himself remains somewhat ambiguous in historical accounts. While Warren's journal portrays him as the enterprise's organizer and principal beneficiary, she also suggests he maintained a certain distance from the actual killings. "Mr. B prefers clean hands," she wrote in June 1881. "He provides direction, but leaves execution to us, claiming women arouse less suspicion. I sometimes wonder if his reluctance springs from prudence or cowardice." Some historians have speculated about Blackwood's background before his arrival in Texas. Military records confirm his service in the Confederate Army, where he served in a quartermaster unit rather than in combat roles. After the war, he briefly appears in New Orleans records as a shipping clerk before vanishing from documented history until his emergence in Texas in 1874. This gap has led to speculation that he may have been involved in other criminal enterprises. During the chaotic Reconstruction period, possibly developing the skills and connections he later employed in Coyote Springs. The women's backgrounds remain even more obscure. Despite extensive research, historians have failed to conclusively trace any of the 4 women before their appearance at the Silver Spur. Elizabeth Warren claimed Pennsylvania origins, but no teaching records or birth certificates matching her. Description have been located. Mary Callahan's alleged history of exploitation by a fraudulent husband finds some corroboration in St. Louis police reports from 1876, describing a young woman matching her description, escaping from a man later, arrested for operating a prostitution ring, though positive identification is impossible. Josephine Miller and Rebecca Thornton remain complete enigmas prior to their Coyote Springs activities. This absence of verifiable background contributed to their eventual escape. With no established identities to connect them to their crimes, they could create entirely new personas elsewhere with minimal risk of detection. In an era before fingerprinting, photography was the only means of identification across jurisdictions, and photographs of the women were scarce and easily avoided. The techniques employed by Blackwood's girls have drawn comparison to other female killers throughout history. Like Belle Gunness, who murdered numerous suitors and boarders at her Indiana farm in the early 1900s, they exploited men's romantic or sexual interest. Like Lavinia Fisher, allegedly America's first female serial killer who targeted guests at Chauveau, her South Carolina tavern in the 1820s, they used a hospitality setting to disarm victims. But unlike these more famous cases, the Silver Spur operation involved a coordinated team with specialized roles, more resembling an organized criminal enterprise than the work of individual killers. The weapons of choice, poison for some victims, blunt force trauma for others, reflect a pragmatic approach to murder. Warren's journal indicates that the method was selected based on the victim's size, sobriety, and how quickly his absence might be noticed. For the cattle driver from Austin, she wrote in August 1883, the arsenic is appropriate. His companions expect him to remain in town for several days, allowing time for the poison to work and symptoms to present as natural illness. For the gambler from Louisiana, who has announced his departure on tomorrow's stage, the rod must be employed for immediate effect. This tactical flexibility, combined with careful victim selection and body disposal, allowed the operation to continue, undetected despite the relatively small size of Coyote Springs. Sheriff Callahan's apparent failure to connect the disappearances may reflect incompetence, as some historians have suggested, or perhaps complicity. Warren's journal makes several oblique references to ensuring official disinterest and the monthly payment that maintains our privacy, suggesting possible corruption, though no direct evidence implicating Callahan has ever been discovered. The Silver Spur case emerges as a study in invisibility, how certain types of criminals operating within but against societal expectations can remain unseen despite operating in plain sight. The women's gender provided an effective cover for their activities, as did the transient nature of their victims. In a frontier society where disappearances were common and law enforcement resources limited, they identified and exploited a perfect environment for predation. In 1996, crime writer Martin Hawkins published Deadly Hospitality, a detailed account of the Coyote Springs murders that became a bestseller and reignited public interest in the case. Hawkins suggested that the total victim count likely exceeded 30 based on discrepancies between Warren's journal entries and the number of remains recovered. He also proposed that Blackwood's operation may have been one of several similar enterprises operating in remote frontier locations, though this theory lacks substantiating evidence. The enduring fascination with Blackwood's girls reflects our continuing struggle to reconcile their actions with persistent gender stereotypes. As criminologist Dr. Eleanor Simmons noted in a 2002 journal article, the cultural narrative of female killers typically emphasizes emotional motivation, passion, revenge, protection. The calculated profit-driven murders committed at the Silver Spur challenged these comfortable categorizations, forcing us to confront the reality that predatory behavior exists independent of gender. Perhaps the most profound legacy of the Coyote Springs case lies in what it reveals about history's blind spots. For decades, the story remained obscure, relegated to local legend and specialized academic interest rather than entering broader historical awareness. This marginalization reflects a broader pattern in which crimes that contradict dominant narratives, in this case about feminine nature and frontier violence, receive less attention than those that confirm existing beliefs. The winds that sweep the former site of Coyote Springs carry no whispers of its past. The land remains silent, keeping its secrets buried beneath layers of soil and time. But in archives and historical records, in the yellowed pages of Elizabeth Warren's journal, the story persists, a dark reminder that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one you've been conditioned not to fear. For those who study the darkest chapters of frontier history, the case of the Silver Spur murders represents a challenge to conventional understanding, not just of crime, but of human nature itself. In the seemingly straightforward narrative of Western expansion, with its familiar archetypes of outlaws and lawmen, the methodical killers of Coyote Springs introduce a complexity that defies easy categorization. They remind us that beneath the mythology of the American frontier lay realities far more disturbing than our historical memory often acknowledges. As Dr. Holloway concluded in her groundbreaking study, the story of Blackwood's girls is not merely a lurid tale of frontier murder, it is a revelation of how effectively social expectations can blind us to danger. These women did not merely kill their victims. They exploited an entire society's assumptions about feminine capability and nature. Their greatest weapon was not poison or iron rod, but the unquestioned belief that women, by their very essence, could not represent a serious threat. It is a lesson about perception and reality that remains relevant beyond its historical context. In the decades since the discovery of Warren's journal, the site of the Silver Spur has been visited by historians, criminologists, and the occasional curiosity seeker. Nothing remains to mark what occurred there, no memorial for the victims, no indication of the horrors that unfolded within walls long since returned to dust. Perhaps this absence of commemoration is fitting for crimes that succeeded through invisibility, carried out by perpetrators who understood that sometimes the most effective way to hide is in plain sight, beneath the shelter of society's unexamined assumptions. The case of the Silver Spur murders ultimately reminds us that history's most disturbing chapters often lie not in what we see, but in what we fail to see. The dangers that exist beyond the frame of our expectations. The predators who understand our blindness better than we understand ourselves.